equipment, rate equipment differently, and realized that if I'm making a chiller, I want to make my chiller look better than somebody's geothermal heat pump. Or if I'm making a geothermal heat pump, I want to make my piece of equipment look better than a rooftop heat pump. So there is an industry organization called AHRI, American Heating and Refrigeration Institute, which is attempted to try to come up with a common method of rating efficiencies of equipment. And so they went to the manufacturers and they said, okay, can you develop some rating standards? And if you look over here on the left, this is the different kind of equipment. And this is the AHRI standard number that has been written for rating that equipment. Now appreciate that all those are written by the manufacturers of that particular piece of equipment. And I've sat in on those meetings with the chiller guys, heat pump guys, VRF guys, so necessarily they want to make their stuff work, right? And AHRI is trying to come up with a fairly unbiased platform. Okay? The first thing that was done, which really makes sense, is that we're going to rate the equipment not just at 100%, but we're going to rate it at part load. And so AHRI decided that we would rate it at 4 points, 100, 75, 50, and 25% part. Okay, I get some real numbers here. Well, the reason that I'm part load is that my cooling load is not as high, right? And generally, your cooling load is a function of the outside air temperature. So notice here, for a chiller, I can rate my part loads at 95 degrees ambient for 100, and then I drop to 80, 65, and 55. Right? So now I know I can rate manufacturer A's chiller against manufacturer's B chiller, and I use those temperatures right there at those 4 different points. And when they publish it, it looks something like this. This is a chiller manufacturer. There's the 4 points. There's the ER at the 4 points, and that is the average of those 4 guys. And you use something called a weighting factor. And here's the weighting factor. So at 100%, we're saying that the equipment only operates at 1 or 2% of the total time. Over here at 75% is much higher. Now, just to make things confusing, AHRI came up with 2 different weighting factors. One called IPLV, Integrated Part Load Factor, and IER, Integrated Energy Efficiency Ratio. And so that's applied to different kinds of equipment. So that sort of confuses the issue a little bit. But back to here. Now, as far as geothermal is concerned, look at these numbers right here. See those numbers? They don't change. I forget who just made a comment. I guess it was Robert. Earth temperatures don't change that much as compared to ambient temperatures. So between winter and summer, if you have a well-designed geothermal system, that temperature variation may only be 10 degrees. I've seen it as low as 2 or 3 degrees. You've got a very low heat. But 10 degrees is not an unusual thing. But in terms of ambient air temperatures, obviously it's going to change dramatically. So AHRI, in arriving at these numbers, decided that for geothermal systems, we're just going to use the same temperature. Notice that it's different here for closed loop and for open loop. That's due to the heat exchanger efficiency, if you will, between the earth and the fluid. If it's a closed loop, I got to go from the earth through the pipe wall into the fluid. That's a heat exchanger. Whereas if it's open loop, I get to use that water or whatever the ground temperature.
And for those of you who haven't had a lot of exposure to geothermal applications, that'll be covered in just a little while. There's 3 different major types of geothermal sourcing.
Okay, so now we got sort of a common basis here that we can make some comparisons. But then we're going to throw another curveball at you. There's basically 3 pieces of equipment in an HVAC system that's going to use energy to heat or cool your building. We got the generation equipment, we just talked about that, right? And we got distribution equipment. Distribution equipment can be a pump, it can be a fan, evaporator fan, plus somehow I got to throw that heat away, and I might need a condenser fan. So what AHRI does is they only include the energy that's part of the box from a given manufacturer. So if I'm doing a chiller, the only thing that's inside the box is the compressor. Chill water pump's not in there. The condenser water pump's not in there. The cooling tower fan's not in there. It's just the compressor, right? If, however, I'm doing a rooftop unit, I've got the compressor, the evaporator fan, the condenser fan, so everything's in there. So if you went through here and you could see then what's included or not included in each one of these standards. Wow. Differences, okay. So what we're trying to get to, because I'm a real simple guy, I want to use these published numbers here, IPLVs and IEERs, to compare not only different manufacturers of the same equipment, but different systems. Geothermal, right? Versus rooftop units, versus chill water, versus VRF or whatever. So I went through and I took what I call an equipment IPLV or IEER, and I derated all these numbers for the things that were left out, and then I tried to take the IPLV and IER and come up with the same weighting factor by using the IEERs. So what I came up with is one number here. This is a long discussion to get to the final result. But what we're trying to do is come up with a single number where I can compare a geothermal system against something else, and I can compare Robert's Bosch units against his competitor's Bosch, or his competitor's geothermal. All right? What's really interesting, take a look at air systems. In general, the system IERs run between 15 and 20 at the very highest. All right? Okay. Now let's look at water-cooled equipment here. We're running between 25 and 35. So I've gone from 15 to 20 up to 25 to 35 by going from air to water cooled. Drum roll. Right? Whoa, here's geothermal. Look at this, 45. My goodness. We've gone to 35 to 45. Variable speed, heat pumps using an open loop. We're approaching 45. Compare that to water cooled and compare that to air cooled here. Significant, almost double the efficiency, right?
If I can interject,
Wow.
Chapter 14 in our book, Greg isn't just pulling this stuff out of the air. He spent a long time doing work that really had not been brought together in the industry. And in Chapter 14, you can find most of these charts. It's really groundbreaking work. I don't think anybody else has done a cumulative effort like this before Greg did.
So let's take this number right here, right? The geothermal numbers, okay? That's the generation equipment. Let's combine that with the distribution number right here. Just a second, we'll get there. Combine that right there, and you discover that a hydronic geothermal heat pump system is in fact the most efficient system available to us in the industry today. It has the lowest distribution energy and has the lowest generation energy. Everybody believe that? Huh? Okay. Interestingly enough, we have a real-world example of this. And it just kind of happened, I'm going to say by accident. This is the AHR building in Atlanta. Anybody been to the AHR building in Atlanta? Ooh, we have one other person. Okay.
Me too.
This is kind of interesting. Very interesting. I've been there. AHR in 2008 decided to remodel their building. It was an older building and hadn't had any work done on it for quite a while. And they also decided that they would put in a couple different HVAC systems to see how they worked. And they picked geothermal and VRF. Really interesting stuff. The top floor is a geothermal system, and the bottom floor is a VRF system. That has been in operation since about late 2009, 2010. Okay. AHR also metered the systems electrically. They're an all-electric system. There's no backup heat for either one of the two systems. There's no gas. It's an all-electric geothermal and an all-electric VRF system. So by reading the electrical meters, you can compare the energy consumption of the two different systems. And AHR put that online. So any of us can go online and download the data. I will tell you it's an unbelievable amount of data. They record the electrical demand every 5 minutes. Wow. That's a lot of data. But nevertheless, you can do that, manipulate it, and you can come up with some really interesting results. These are the results. The red represents the VRF system, energy consumption. This is for 2012. This is the most recent data we have completely. And the blue represents geothermal. Significant difference. So despite what the VRF guys say, that they have the most efficient system, here's a real-world example that says, no, the geothermal is by far more efficient. This is what it looks like on an annual basis.
Greg, just so they know, the geothermal is on the top or the bottom floor?
It's on the top floor.
And what's the difference in square footage between the floors? Do you remember that?
The bottom floor has about 25% more square footage. So if you look at my numbers here, it's kilowatt hours per square foot per year. So I normalized it by dividing the total energy consumption by the square footage for each floor. So you can get an honest comparison between the top floor and the second floor. Now you can argue on the first floor, which is mostly classrooms, that it has a higher internal heat gain because of the people load. That's true. The people are not there all the time. They're only there from 8 to 5. The day I was there, about half the classrooms were full. So yes, there'll be a slightly higher cooling load from the people, but in the wintertime, the people are additive, right?
So it would balance out.
I don't know, probably. The top floor has a roof load all year long, all day long. There's a higher cooling load and a higher heating load. So what I'm trying to suggest to you is that I think it's a pretty valid comparison here between the two systems. Yeah, there's differences here and there, but in general, you're talking a building with roughly the same envelope, same occupancies, those kinds of things. So to me, that pretty much disputes the claims that the VRF guys are saying they're the most efficient. Geothermal is, in fact, the most efficient. Now, I've had this question asked. What if we did geothermal with VRF? What does that do to the numbers? Legitimate question. And in fact, the VRF guys will say, if we did VRF, we'd be better. No. From a generation standpoint, I agree. Because the efficiency of the system is merely a function of the heat sink temperature. So whether it's VRF or whether it's geothermal or some other fluid, air, as an example, if you're rejecting heat to the ground, it's going to be the same efficiency. Then you're down to the distribution energy.